Here we are at the crossing point where Willis Mill Road, moving from Martin Luther King south, the old Gordon Road, south going toward Cascade, we're at the crossing of North Utoy Creek, which was very important during the operations of the Battle of Utoy Creek. If you'll notice, Chad, if you could point down into the creek, it's almost a quarter of a mile wide here at the creek, and it's deep in some places, 4 or 5 feet. And for a large number of troops to cross a water crossing is a big deal. You don't want to get stuck crossing a creek when the enemy is up on top of the hill. So Armstrong's dismounted cavalry is on the top of this hill down here, firing down. They also have artillery. You certainly do not want to be caught with a large force crossing the creek when the enemy can rain artillery and fire down on you and you're stuck. Here's the other thing of very much importance that is not discussed. Anyone from Atlanta knows in August, especially last August, just like the August of 1864, weather is an issue. Every afternoon, because of the heat of the day, in the afternoon there's a rain shower. And this little creek here, which looks pretty serene right now, when you get an afternoon shower, becomes a mini Chattahoochee River with a torrent of fast-moving water. If you happen to make an attack in the afternoon across here, you are stuck and will be captured by the enemy on the other side. And no one wants to go to Andersonville, I assure you. So all of these factors are taken into account when they begin their operation. Johnson's division is to the far left. About a mile to our east is Herren's Mill. Now, because the Confederates had destroyed the bridge here, the wooden bridge here, at Willis Mill Road, and they had destroyed the bridge about 3/4 of a mile to the west at Peyton Road, there was no official place to cross and bring your artillery across the creek. So what did the soldiers do? They wound up going to the mill dam at Herren's Mill, and they used the dam that blocked the creek, and that's how the Johnson's division and Haskell's division of the 14th Army Corps crossed North Utoy to get at the Confederates. Now the Confederates are here facing south to the creek, but they've also taken up a position that is perpendicular to the creek, facing this way. They know the Federals are coming down this road. They hear the Federal movements, so they have a position that is immediately behind the Beecher Hills School, but this position is facing west. Here we are along North Utoy Creek. Where are we specifically? We're actually under the Georgia Power transmission wire line where it crosses North Utoy Creek. We're immediately east of the Willis Mill Road about 3/4 of a mile, and we sit on the site of where the Herren's Mill was located. The Herren family settled here. They were of German ancestry, and they decided to build a grist mill here. And what was the grist mill's purpose? You could take corn that was grown in the area, you could bring it to the grist mill, it could be ground into cornmeal, into grits that were used for people's sustenance in the 18th century. Although I had grits this morning myself. Now, what's significant about Herren's Mill from a military point of view is because the Confederate troops were immediately south on top of this hill up here, Confederate cavalry's firing down, but this is a significant hill. The Federal troops moved around to Herren's Mill here, and they actually crossed at the mill dam here where they wouldn't have to go in the water. And the mill dam was right over here. You see the remains of the stones that used to be here 157 years ago. There was actually a mill. And the most famous person to ever visit here, besides Chad Carlson, my hero who's documenting this, was William T. Sherman. And why did William T. Sherman come to Herren's Mill and to the Herren's house immediately north of here after the 1st Division had secured the area? Because General John M. Palmer, commanding the 14th Corps, asked to be relieved of his duties. He wanted to resign because he didn't want to work under Schofield. Schofield had come up with this plan where one unit of the 14th Army Corps would cross the creek and make an attack along with one unit of the 23rd Corps. These units typically did not work together, had no history of working together, and it's not simply how things were done. The SOP is you would give a unit a sector, and they would work in that particular sector, and they were accustomed to having one unit on one side, one unit in the center, and one unit on the right. This completely messed up anything that had been prepared as sort of an SOP before, but this is how Schofield operated. Schofield himself was not here at the creek. Schofield was up along the Martin Luther King Road, approximately where the McDonald's was, at the Smith house, at the widow Smith's house, where he was comfortably having tea and going over his administrative messages. Because Schofield did not do a good reconnaissance himself, it caused a number of problems with the Battle of Utoy Creek, and it really explains later, as Schofield becomes Chief of Staff of the Army in the 1880s, when the official records are published, that he doesn't want to even mention the Battle of Utoy Creek because it was a total disaster for him. Schofield had not really commanded an offensive operation on his own. This is really the first time that he did this. He began by sending orders, because he only has 2 divisions in his corps, and he's accustomed to sending orders directly to the division commanders, began sending orders directly to Palmer's division commanders and cutting Palmer out of the loop, which absolutely infuriated Palmer. It insulted him as an officer. Secondly, to have this man Schofield, who is 33, a West Point graduate, being placed over him when he is 52 and he was commissioned a Major General before Schofield, causes him great consternation. The Army rules are the senior officer on the battlefield takes command. That would have been Palmer. But Sherman didn't operate by the book. Sherman did what Sherman wanted to do. Sherman liked West Pointers more than volunteers, and since Schofield was a regular Army officer, decided to place Schofield in charge of this operation rather than Palmer, because he wanted to also help out Schofield, because Schofield's uncle was a congressman, which could help Sherman at some point of time in the political realm of things. So all these things taken into account, Sherman came here to Herring's Mill to cross the mill where his men crossed. He wanted to see where they crossed. And he went to the Herring House, which is immediately north of us, and the Confederate position is up beyond that point. And at the Herring House, he spoke to Palmer and asked Palmer to reconsider his resignation at this time. He personally came and visited a corps commander to discuss this with him. Because, why was it? He was, of course, concerned about Palmer's career. But what do I think that Sherman was really concerned about? It made Sherman look bad, and it didn't. Sherman was not going by the book. He asked Palmer to wait to some later time to resign for another reason, but not to do it right now in the middle of the operation. But Palmer had enough with these little hopscotch sort of movements that Schofield ordered, where one division of the 14th Corps came across here and made an attack, then one division of the 23rd Corps got mixed in, and then he pulled them out, and then the 1st Division of the 14th Corps is moved over to Peyton Road. It was just crazy the way it was operating. So Palmer had enough, and he issued his resignation, which was finally accepted on the main attack at Utoy Creek on the 6th. But his soldiers were involved, Palmer, on the 3rd and on the 5th to make main attacks along, first of all, Beecher Circle, where they pushed the Confederates back to a main line in what is now the Greenwood Cemetery and John A. White Park. But the Confederate line was originally facing westward at the top of this ridge behind the Beecher Hills School. And that is what significantly happened here. The Union troops crossed the dam right here at Herring's Mill.
Can you talk about the Herren family, what they would have been doing during this time?
The Herren family were exempt from Confederate service because they operated a mill, an important industry to the community. So they were exempted from Confederate service. And John Herring actually operated the mill, although his son was in the 42nd Georgia Infantry, which was in Stovall's brigade, right facing these troops up here to the south in S.D. Lee's corps. They were involved in the Battle of Ezra Church, and now they were defending. And Herring's son in the 42nd Georgia was almost on his family property defending. An interesting side story Again, the Herring home was southeast of the mill itself, along Beecher Circle, and that's where the Herring home was located. That is where General Sherman came and met Palmer, and they discussed his potential resignation. But the significance of this, Herring's Mill, is where the Union troops crossed North Utoy to begin the operation against the Confederates of S.D. Lee's corps. Now, S.D. Lee begins running out of men at this time. He doesn't have enough men to face the onslaught of two corps advancing. So he sends a message to General Shoup, who is Hood's new chief of staff, and Shoup orders Hardee to attach Bate's division to S.D. Lee's command, that he may call on him for orders. Now, where were Bate and Claiborne's divisions? They were in an extended line that was being built down through what is now Adams Park. So what happened to them is they were going to be moved up parallel to the Cascade Road from their position in Adams Park like a gate to block the Federals. Why would they block the Federals? Because they wanted to keep the Federals away from their railroad and their supply lines. Now, as we cross the hill, look at this hill. This hill is significant. You go from 700 feet elevation up to over 1,200 feet at the top of the hill. And this grade is too steep for any mule or horse or animal to go up. In fact, I might have trouble going up the hill myself right now. But the soldiers went up here with their packs up the hill, and then after going up this hill, they faced the Confederates on top of the hill who were entrenched. It's tough attacking here. Now, when you look at the blue map that General Sherman talks about that he gave to Schofield, it shows where the creeks come from, but it doesn't take into account this topography. The Southerners use the topography to their advantage, and it absolutely benefits the defender. So why haven't you heard of the Battle of Utoy Creek? That's the question that always comes up. You have two corps attacking really two divisions. That's a 6-to-1 advantage. The Federal Army should have knocked through it, right? With a 6-to-1 advantage, why were they not able to be successful? Because the Confederates used the terrain to their advantage. The Confederates used even their dismounted cavalry to their advantage, and because of the squabbling between Schofield and Palmer during this particular operation over the question of rank. All of these things do not make Schofield look well. So later in the 1880s, after Sherman is retired from being the Chief of Staff of the Army, Schofield becomes Chief of Staff of the Army, partially because of his uncle's political connections in Congress. He's later named Chief of Staff of the Army. And Schofield does not ever want to discuss Utoy Creek. Why? Sherman sent him a telegram during the middle of the operation. Sherman says to Schofield, "General Schofield, your lack of offensive movement is in my mind equal to the loss of 2,000 men. Well, in the attacks that follow on the 3rd and the 5th and the 6th and the 7th and the 10th and the 14th, all relating to the Utoy Creek operation, that's about how many men are lost by the Federal Army at this operation to cut the railroads at East Point." To put in perspective, in August of 1864, the morale of the Union Army is the lowest, not of the Union Army, but the Union public is the lowest it has been. There are several reporters who are embedded with units, one with the 14th Army Corps. And here's what the New York Times reporter said. He said, "Today the soldiers' morale is very low. They're living in the field. They're being eaten up in the pine straw by the little redbug insects that bite people. It's tough living in the field. It's hot in the mornings, and then you have a deluge of rain in the afternoons. It's a very difficult time." The other thing is on the same day that Sherman wrote his order directing the movements against East Point and what we now call as the Battle or Operation for Utoy Creek, the Chief of Staff of the Army, General Halleck, sent a telegram to all the Army commanders the same day that Sherman sent his order out. And it said as follows: "General Sherman, General Schofield, General Thomas, General Howard, you will not report negative information that can be used against the re-election of the President. Wow. So if the operation at Utoy is not successful, they don't talk about it. What did Sherman say on the night of the 6th of August, 1864, with real information received from Schofield and Palmer? He telegraphs Halleck that Schofield went around the flank of the enemy, making a noisy but not very bloody battle, with a loss of approximately 1,000 men on each day. What does Schofield write in his memoirs? Schofield has 28 brigades under his command, but in his memoirs at Utoy Creek, does he mention Utoy Creek? Yes. What does he report? He only reports a casualty of 1 brigade. Riley's brigade lost 350 men. That's what he puts in his report. Why did he do that? One, he was ordered by Halleck to minimize negative information that could be used against the president. Secondly, he had a huge ego and he didn't want to report that he had an unsuccessful attack. So he minimized it. And here's the third thing. In a book called Get to Know General Grant, published by a staff officer who overheard a conversation between Sherman and Grant after the Vicksburg operation, this staff officer documented Grant's conversation to Sherman. He said, Sherman, I'm leaving to go up to, we're going to Chattanooga, and then I'm going to take command of the Army in Virginia, and you're going to be placed in command. He said, I got some advice for you. Number one, never ever tell the press what you're doing. What you're doing in the press, if it gets published in the press, it'll be in the Charleston Mercury, the Richmond, and the Atlanta papers, and the enemy will know what your intentions are, and they can work against you. So never tell the press what you're doing. And the second thing applies here at Utoy Creek. He says, whenever you make an attack and it's not successful, don't call it an attack. Call it a heavy demonstration. So this is a code word that Grant instructs Sherman to use when he's made an attack that's not successful. Grant will know that he made an attack, but because he's calling it a heavy demonstration, it doesn't sound like it's an attack, and it won't bring discredit upon the Union Army or hurt Lincoln's re-election.